So if you've decided to buy in France, you obviously will have needed to decide what area. However, some people, when they first start this process, may not have even narrowed down where they want to live in France. When looking at which area suits you, there's obviously a number of factors that you might want to take into consideration. Climate, amenities, airports in particular are important for connections back to family if you're going to be regularly going back, as well as access to healthcare. Once you've narrowed down your area, there's two options available to you. Obviously, you can do the research yourself, identifying estate agents that operate in that area, or you might want to engage the services of a property finder who can help do that search for you. One point to note between estate agents in France versus elsewhere: estate agents act for the individual selling the property. They don't act for the person buying the property. So you may want to consider, if you are looking for a buyer's agent, using a property finder who will do that service rather than estate agents who will generally have properties on their book for the clients that they're representing, and they will only be able to show you those properties. Once you've identified some suitable properties, you can go view them. The estate agent or whoever, if you've responded to a private advert, then potentially the vendor will show you around the property. To note, it's not common to have surveys done in France. There is a standardised report that is prepared as part of the process of purchasing, but this report does not cover, for example, structural issues. So if you're looking for something that covers structural issues and other building problems, then you need to make sure you engage someone to specifically undertake that, as it will not be done as a matter of course. Once you're ready to make your offer, you can do that via the agent who has shown you the property. Then the process will begin of them instructing a notary. You can use the same notary as the vendor if you choose, but you do not have to. And once that process starts, then all of the legal documentation will be drawn up. So the notaire undertakes all of the legal requirements related to a property purchase. They will ensure, for example, that boundaries are correct on the cadastral plans. They will go through the government processes necessary if there's any preemption rights, for example, over the property you're buying within the local commune. They will also make sure that there are no issues surrounding the property with rights of way, for example. And also they will make sure that all taxes in relation to the purchase are appropriately dealt with as part of the sale of it. So one point to note if you're buying a rural property which has a lot of land with it, is that there will be an additional requirement for the notary to approach SAFA, and this is the body that deals with preemption rights and offering that land to local agricultural individuals, for example, and that process can take around 3 months, assuming that no one does want to buy the land that you're looking to purchase. You can pay additional fees for this to be expedited, but it's to bear in mind that this has to be factored into the time frame for purchasing a property if that step is needed. In relation to your offer having been accepted, excuse me, sorry, my voice has just gone then. In relation to your offer having been accepted and the notary commencing work, generally it can take 3 to 6 months for completion to take place, unless there are any issues around the transfer of title. For example, where you have properties that have been inherited and there might be a number of individuals who now own the property, obviously that can take longer to get everyone's consent to the sale and the necessary paperwork completed. The notary will commence work on the compromis de vente, which is roughly equivalent to the conditions of sale, which will contain all of the details of the agreed price, the parcel of the land referencing the cadastre plan, as well as any specific terms and conditions. So, for example, if you're taking a mortgage, then the offer will be subject to a mortgage being obtained and in place. and it gives you a 10-day withdrawal period before it becomes legally binding after you have signed it. So if you sign it, you then have a 10-day cooling off period to be able to withdraw from the purchase of the property. Once the compromise has been signed, there will be an approximate exchange date. Obviously, it can't be definitive because of the number of steps that may be involved, the number of parties externally, for example, if there's a number of individuals involved as part of any inheritance, or if SAFA have to be consulted. But there will be an approximate date for the exchange, and an acte de vente will be drawn up as part of this, so that when it comes to final exchange day, this will all be signed off, and the notary will ensure that the funds that you have to provide are in place in advance of that, and any necessary fees that will be paid to the government as part of that as well. One point also to consider, especially if there are blended families involved, is to make sure you seek appropriate advice regarding inheritance of the property given France's inheritance laws and the rights of children under those. The other thing to talk about with your notary in relation to inheritance is whether a tontine clause is of benefit to you. This clause can be put in to give lifetime enjoyment to a remaining partner in the event of the other partner predeceasing the other one. This will ensure that the remaining partner can remain in the property until such time as they are also deceased. So you might also want to think, when you're dealing with the notary, about putting a will in place, as whilst you might already have one in place overseas, if this doesn't cover overseas assets, or for example if you're becoming French resident and the inheritance rules that apply here, it's always best to seek that appropriate advice to make sure that you've planned ahead for the future. So on the day that you go to sign the final acte de vente, you'll go into the notary's office. Please bear in mind that you will need to make sure you have insurance in place, so that you can show that you've insured the property from the date that you are purchasing it. Also, you may have been requested by the notary to bring a cheque, for example, for any apportionment of taxe d'habitation, for example, but the notary will have communicated that to you in advance, so you'll be aware of anything additional that you need to take with you. You will then go through a process where the notary will effectively read all the major terms of the acte de vente to you, and you have to confirm your understanding and acceptance of them, and it can be quite a long document, so this can take some time. Once everything has then been signed, you will then be given the keys to your new property. Another thing to bear in mind is that all parties to the acte de vente will be present, so that means the people selling to you will also be there in the room with you, confirming their understanding and acceptance of the terms as well. You will be asked by the notary to make sure that there are cleared funds in their account in advance of that signing day, so that the purchase can go ahead. One thing to bear in mind when you're looking around a property is if there's anything in particular that you like about that particular place, is that if there's something you want left behind or you're expecting to be included within the sale, speak to the agent and make sure it's put into the contract. So once you've got the keys to your property, obviously you'll want to go in and have a look round and start moving your furniture in. In terms of the utilities, it will depend on what the seller has done in terms of notifications. It might be that you arrive and they've had everything disconnected because they've wanted the accounts in their name ceased, or they may have just requested that their account be suspended and that you can then phone the relevant provider up and take the account on yourself. You will need to contact the relevant utility provider to take over that account and provide your information. Or alternatively, you might not want to go with the supplier that they were with, and therefore you can arrange yourself to take out a contract with an entirely new supplier. So in terms of how you deal with all of that administration, some people might not be as confident in French, and therefore this might seem quite daunting. Some service providers do have an English-speaking line, but not all, and therefore you may wish to consider using someone who can help you set all of those up, so that that's one less thing on your to-do list once you've moved in. So once you've moved in, you want to think about going to meet your neighbours, especially if you live in a more rural area. Community is a very important part of French life, and going and introducing yourself to your neighbours, your local mairie, will be an undoubted benefit in terms of integration into your new life. Again, if you're not confident in French, arm yourself with a few phrases before you go and speak to them. A lot of the time, people will see that you're making the effort, and if you do get really stuck, then there is always Google Translate as a backup.